Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, Eskom and the Department of Environmental Affairs are in a race to complete repairs at Kusile power station. The utility has requested to build 3 temporary exhaust stacks, they say, will reduce load shedding by at least 2 stages. They've asked Environmental Affairs Minister Barbara Kusile to exercise her emergency powers and approve exemptions. Let's speak now to spokesperson for the Department of Environmental Affairs, Albi Modise. Mr. Modise, good morning and thank you very much for your time. Perhaps to finally settle this, firstly, has Eskom brought an application for the exemption for them to quickly build these exhaust stacks?
Good morning and thanks for the opportunity and a very good morning to the viewers. I think let's take a few steps back and say the department has received a request dated the 30th of January, which sought advice from the department. That letter was from Eskom, and that request was to specifically with regards to the construction of temporary stacks at the Kusile power station. And that is not an application; it's a request for advice, right? So therefore, it would not qualify as an application. And subsequent to that, but first let me say that an application, for it to be an application, it must be submitted in terms of the National Environment Management Act, which should contain certain minimum information about the nature of the emergency that the incident is going to address, and any potential harm to the environment, human or property, as well as management measures to reduce or manage potential impact. So there is a number of requirements that an application that would qualify as an emergency would seek to tick. Last week, after the briefing on Friday, where Minister joined other ministers on the energy matters related to disaster management, the minister was made aware of the fact that there is a letter that was received from Eskom, and the minister has then handed over that letter to legal services for legal advice. I need to say that in terms of the laws of this country, the authorization when it comes to environmental authorizations sit with the competent authority. The competent authority in this instance is the department. Minister serves as an appeal authority. So for an example, let's say you apply for construction of a particular site and the department declines the application. The system allows you an opportunity to make an appeal to the appeal authority. In this instance is the minister. So we would like to emphasize the fact that, Fundo, our approach is not to prohibit development. We are mindful of the energy hunger in this country. We experience it like all other South Africans. But we also have a responsibility as entrusted by the Constitution to ensure that all organizations that operate in South Africa comply with the laws of this country. And in this particular instance, with Eskom as well, the same applies. We don't have exclusions, by the way, when it comes to the law. The law is applied evenly. There could be certain provisions that the disaster management might allow minister to do, but minister was quite emphatic last week when she briefed the media. She emphasized that the enabling powers given to her by the Disaster Management Act are not intended to bypass environment laws, nor are they intended to give a blanket authorization for any developments.
Yes, and we heard that quite clearly, that really what's about to happen now with the state of disaster is to expedite the processes, not necessarily exempt from complying with any environmental laws, which becomes a problem because Eskom here is not looking to expedite the process per se. They are essentially seeking an exemption in the betterment of all of us, like in our betterment, that here they're going to avoid 2 stages at the very least. So in this instance, what could possibly be the call?
Look, I think the minister was clear when she briefed on Friday. The directives that we are currently considering relate to the expedited procedural requirements and shorten the time period that we have in terms of decision making, but also ensure that we do all of those things mindful and directed by the environmental rights as they are set out in Section 24 of the Constitution. Currently, Mfundo, the department can reduce decision-making timeframes from 107 to 57 days for projects that are defined as strategic infrastructure projects, and these particular projects would qualify as those projects. And let's also remember that the intention of these regulations under the Disaster Management Act and any directions that are to be developed would be to primarily, as you correctly pointed out, ensure that we expedite the approval process and make sure that decision-making does not in any way flout the laws of the country. We are worried about the energy situation. We would want to make sure that South Africans get their power back. We would also want to make sure that as we do all of those things, let's ensure that we expedite the process, do not in any way bypass any laws.
So is there an intention to expedite at least the decision-making process here? Because Eskom, at the very least, is stating that it's a matter of urgency. They need to know if they can go ahead because they'd have to order the steel to construct these exhaust stacks as soon as possible. Is the minister now seized, or the department rather seized with this matter, or you are still awaiting their application? If none comes, you most certainly cannot make a decision.
So as I mentioned, when Minister came back from the briefing on Friday, she was made aware of the fact that the evening preceding that on Thursday, at night, there was a submission from Eskom, and Minister, when she briefed the media, she made it clear, well, first, just because the submission came afterwards, Minister made it clear that she then will have to engage with legal advice in the department in terms of the process. But of course, it's important to notify that the Minister has given this particular request from Eskom to the legal advice for them to guide her on the way forward. But of course, it's important to note that the Minister's responsibility in this instance would also take a cue from the Disaster Management Act, while at the same time making sure that we comply with the laws of the country. We are worried about the energy situation. We are also saying that sustainable development is quite an important element. It talks about economic growth, environmental protection. It talks about the people as well. And all of those three elements are quite key in making sure that we grow the economy of this country.
It's honestly an unenviable position that you guys find yourselves in. It's a very tough call to make. But I just want to take you back to the correspondence. At first, there was no application. There was just correspondence between the department and Eskom. But they're somewhat aggrieved because they dealt with the DG, I think it's Ms. Nomfundo Shabalala. They believe that, yes, they believe that when speaking to her during the communication, she indicated that basically these conversations were enough. There was no application beyond this point. She would guide the process. They thought all was well. And then later on in the process, there was an about turn. So that in itself, did it not waste time for Eskom to at least put together the application and quickly get some sort of a decision so they know what next step to take?
In all of the previous conversations with Eskom, when it comes to the National Air Quality Act and all the other environmental legislations, we've impressed upon the entity that it's important that we ensure that we comply with the law. We've always impressed upon them that there will be no exclusions when it comes to the law. I would not want to get into the details of whether there was a correspondence between the DG and Eskom. What I want to talk to is what the law requires of us in Pundo. The law requires of us that we ensure that as and when Eskom would want to, like in this instance, construct temporary stacks at Kusile power stations, there are processes that need to be followed. And we want to make sure that as we continue to engage with Eskom going forward, we impress upon them the urgency to move with speed, but also to ensure that as we do all of those things, mindful of the acts, but also within the ambit of protection of environment, while responding to the energy hunger in the country. It's a balance that we need to strike at all times.
All right, Mr. Modise, thank you very much for your time this morning. That was spokesperson for the Department of Environmental Affairs, Albi Modise.